Welcome to this week's episode of Keys to the Market. Today, we're going to talk about what it looks like to purchase a manufactured home here in Arizona. As the market does what the market is doing, and stick-built houses start to get less and less affordable or available. Manufactured homes are probably going to make a comeback strong. They're going to be more desirable because one, the prices tend to be um, more advantageous for buyers, and the availability of manufactured homes is starting to just really be a thing. Now, here in Arizona, something to keep in mind is that a lot of manufactured homes, you're going to find those in parks. So we'll talk about that first, and then we'll get into some things to consider when you're purchasing either in a park or out of a park. But to just go ahead and delve right into it, manufactured homes. It's a tough but not impossible thing to work. Like I said, out here in Arizona, a lot of the times when you see those, you're going to see them in parks, and a large percentage of those are going to be in parks that are adult, sorry, active adult parks. Active adult parks, those are parks where the residents need to be at least 55 years of age or older. And then they have their own rules surrounding that. So while there may be some available where one party has to be 55, and then maybe anyone else can be under a certain age. Then there's some where everybody has to be 55. Then there's some where you can be 54 and a half. Like, there's all these rules. So keep this in mind when you're looking at those parks. Make sure before you even decide to put an offer in, even after you've gone and seen it in person, made sure it's the one you want. Check the guidelines and the requirements for that park before you put your offer in, so that doesn't come back to bite you in the behind later on down the road. What I like to do for my clients is when they tell me their situation up front, for example, maybe there's a spouse situation where one of the spouses is over the age of 55 and the other spouse is maybe 42 or 43. Stuff happens. Now you got to look into those guidelines and see, okay, which one of these parts is going to work for my client? Can they move into this part? Can they move into this one based on those requirements? So that's something you want to definitely look up, or have your agent get that information for you before you go forward. Um, that's the main thing for the parks as far as the 55 plus. Um, all ages parks tend to not be as bad on restrictions. Obviously, they're for everyone, but there are not that many of them here in the valley. Um, the hard part is trying to find them. Because a lot of times when you see those listed in MLS or on Zillow, it's hard to figure out that information. So again, that's what an agent is for. So if you can't find the information, what I'll do is I'll do a separate video on my social media where to look. If you're on Zillow looking for houses, where to look to see if that house is age restricted, so you don't get excited when you see that $40,000 price point and then you realize, yeah, this is not for me. Um, Another thing to consider with manufactured homes in parks are the land lease fees. So what's a land lease? Here we go. We're just going to go down a rabbit hole at this point. So a land lease means basically the following. You may own that property, meaning you may own that trailer or that manufactured home, but you will never own the land that it sits on. Uh, and then there's restrictions behind that, because there are some times where that manufactured home that you own, you can't move off the land when you leave. So you have to sell it to somebody else. So these are things you want to confirm before you put in your offer and get settled into a place that you fell in love with, for lack of a better term, going forward. Something else to keep in mind when you're looking at parks. Financing in these parks is possible. It's not impossible. You just have to make sure you're working with the right lender that understands the guidelines and understands all of the back end stuff that goes along with the financing portion. So as of recently, we're starting to see an uptick in a product called I may be saying this wrong, chattel loans, which basically means you can purchase the main. I'm used to calling them trailers because that's what we call them in Florida. Here, they are referred to as manufactured homes. when you're purchasing those, you can purchase those separately from the land because, of course, you're not buying the land, you're only buying the place. So basically, it's personal property. So a chattel loan will do that for you. The only thing with those, and then you have hard money loan options. There are some lenders who have conventional loan options that will work. I will say that FHA and VA are harder to do. I'm not going to sit here and say 100% that they can't be done, but in my experience, I haven't been able to do one yet. And the reason being is because the land leases, you can purchase a manufactured home or a home on leased land so long as the land lease is at least the length of the mortgage term. Meaning, if you have your property mortgaged for 20 years, the land lease needs to be at least 20 years. The problem in the parks is those land lease agreements usually go year to year. So do not get caught up in a lender saying, yes, I can do a land lease when they really can't. Make sure that they absolutely can do that. So that's something to keep in mind. So just know that you can do it, but there are certain rules regarding how it can be done. Make sure your lender understands. So land leases, the fun part about those is, remember I said you can find a property that's $40,000. You can, but the problem then becomes the land lease, because a lot of times I can tell you from experience, and this is me speaking from what I know, not from what I've heard. You will see land leases, and if you see one less than $500 a month, send it to me now because I can barely find them. And if you do find them, they're probably out in the middle of the sticks somewhere, and you got to really want to go out that way. Land lease fees on average, I'm seeing on average is about $700 a month, and that's the land lease. And then remember this about land leases: they don't expire, they don't go away. It's not like something that you keep paying down and eventually it stops. No, land leases typically go up at least annually. Maybe you're not going to see a big jump now, but consider this: if you end up staying in that property for 10 years, you may see $100, $200 jump from when you started. And who's to say your income is going to match? So these are things you want to think about ahead of time before you get into that arena. Make sure you understand the financial ramifications of going into a land lease, because again, that is something that could become, even though it might not be one today, it could become an issue later down the road. And then also you have to consider, from what I'm seeing, again, this is me speaking from experience. I'm seeing the qualifications to get into these parks are not the easiest. It is almost harder to qualify for the land lease than it is to qualify for the mortgage. What do I mean by that? A lot of the qualifications for these land lease situations, the credit scores, you got to have a 650 or a 700. Well, what if you were able to get your mortgage with a 620? Now you can't get the land lease because they need a 650. So it's all these things. They check your background, they check your credit. It's basically like doing a whole nother mortgage situation all over again. Well, mortgage doesn't check the background because you're leasing their land. So these are things you want to keep in mind. And yes, you have to pay for that. So what I mean pay for that is they charge you for that check. So you bank out another 50 to $100 for your background / credit check with Park. This is not to discourage people. This is to inform you, to let you know what you're getting into before you go out, get excited about a place, and then you start watching that money just go down the drain. I am not opposed to those parks because they do have great amenities. For example, if you're, in your later years and you don't want to have to worry about keeping up with yard work or maintaining a pool or whatever the case may be, you will be able to do that in these parks because they offer that. Well, they don't take care of your landscaping, but you don't have a whole lot of yards, so that takes away that much. They tend to be smaller units, so they're not as big for you have to worry about, 2,500 square foot houses anymore. They're usually they mostly are only one story, so you don't have to worry about stairs per se. And something also that I found very interesting out here in Arizona, because I'm used to, when you're looking at a trailer or manufactured home, you're going to walk up some stairs to get to it. There are actually ones out here in Arizona that sit on the ground level. And then they're tied down below the surface. So those are kind of cool too, where you don't have to worry about walking upstairs. You can go right into your home, and it looks more like a home, strangely enough, to me, when they sit on the ground like that. And then they usually have great amenities in their community. They have pools, they'll have shuffleboards, they'll have pickleball courts, tennis courts, um, community center events, walking trails. All this stuff is in this community. Some of them are gated if you are worried about safety and people being able to get in and out of your community. So they have their highlights. And so I'm not saying they are bad ideas. I'm just saying make sure you understand what you're getting into before you go that route. And then there's a sense of community in those parks as well, because those people tend to gel together and they become the greatest of neighbors. Everybody tends to know everybody. They look out for each other. So again, they have their advantages of moving to those parks. But like I said, I'm here to just kind of give you the don't forget about this part of those parks as well. So let's just talk about buying a manufactured home in general. If there's no land lease or park involved, for example, say you found, and you're going to typically find this probably, I'll give you the areas here where you may find manufactured homes and there's no lease land attached. You may find them in Mesa. You may find them in Coolidge, Casa Grande, um, Maricopa, Arizona City. Florence is you can find some in Florence. I'm trying to think where else. Maybe Phoenix, but those are going to be few and far between. You may find some in parks, but the parks are now defunct, so there's no land lease. So you may still find them in a park, but they may be on their own land. That's typically now, and then Tonopah, I know you'll find them out in Tonopah as well, and that's going west, going towards California from the valley. I don't know about up north. I know about the valley. I don't know about up north and down by Tucson, some of the cities down that way. You'll be able to find them down there as well. So things to look for when you're going into it. Like I said, first, if you're financing, if you're going VA or FHA, make sure your lender knows everything that goes into purchasing a home with those loan products. Conventional is not as hard, but they do have similar guidelines. I learned that recently when I actually had a buyer who purchased down in Sierra Vista, and they purchased their home with a conventional loan. And something that I asked this question beforehand, but again, we didn't find out until the underwriters came back and said, yeah, we kind of need it. But now I know, so I know how to handle this going forward. So let's go through the process. We just found a home. It's me and you. You're my buyer, I'm your agent. You found a manufactured home that you love. It's not on lease land. It's sitting out on quarter of an acre in the middle of yonder. We're just gonna make that a city. In the middle of yonder, you want to put an offer in on it. All right, here we go. Here's what I'm going to tell you when we get ready to put that offer in. All right. So you're going to want to, don't skip the inspection. I don't care what nobody says. Even if it's brand new, don't skip the inspection. I just looked at a 2023 manufactured home that had a roof crack already. 2023, nobody's ever lived in it. Do not skip on the inspection. So you're going to get a home inspection. You're going to get a wood destroying organisms inspection, also known as a termite inspection. If you have an FHA or a VA loan, that is required. If you have a conventional loan, not so much. I still highly suggest it, especially if it's an older unit, because remember, these places are wood. So you want to make sure that that wood is sound, top and bottom. So you want to get those two things. They are not one and the same. Those are two separate inspections. They may be done by the same company, but they are two separate inspections. And then also understand that there's a certain report that goes along with this. So make sure that that inspector understands, hey, I'm using a VA loan, or hey, my client's using an FHA loan versus they may be using a conventional loan. So that's the home inspection. You want to get that done. Now, as you're walking through the product, we haven't gotten to that point yet. We're going to back up. We're walking through the product. What we are looking for together, me and you, we're looking for water stains under all the sinks. We're looking for water stains on the ceiling because we are not on the roof. So we don't know what's going on the roof, but a lot of times the ceiling will tell you what's going on the roof. So you want to look for water stains. Look to see if it looks like it's been painted over. Check the vents. So you want to look at the vents. There may be vents in the ceiling. There may be vents on the floor. Check those vents and see how dirty they are, because that can be indicative of an issue with the AC unit, or it just may need to be serviced. So you want to check those things. You want to look for these. You want to look for water stains because, again, this is a unit that it's probably sitting off the ground. Very likely it's sitting off the ground. So leaks or not. If you see a leak in the sink and it starts to go all the way through, like there's nothing underneath that house. There's no ground there. That's a hole. So you want to check those things. Make sure those are intact. Um, check the wood, what we call the eaves around the outside. So you have your roof line, and then just below your roof line is that little I don't even know how to explain it, but they're called eaves. You want to check those, make sure those look, the paint isn't chipping or the wood doesn't look, destroyed. And you want to also do that around the skirting of the house, because that will be a call out. These are things that if you see them, an inspector will see them and they're probably going to see more. So if you see these things, keep these in mind as things to keep your eyes out for when you're going into these places. Obviously, things like carpet can be addressed, windows, the older the home, 9 times out of 10, the older the window. So keep these things in mind as you're going forward. And these are questions you can ask. A lot of times, if it's a newer owner, they may not know um, how old certain things are. So I go under the assumption is that you don't know, it's not been addressed, it's old, it's original. I'm not gonna say old, it's original. So, like for example, if the roof hasn't been replaced, and you're looking at a unit that was built in 1980 and nobody knows that the roof was replaced, probably gonna have to be replacing the roof. So, and it's not expensive. That's the good part about a manufactured home is getting things done. Not that expensive. It can all be done fairly inexpensively. So that's the lure behind a manufactured home. So these are things you want to keep your eye on. Like I said, you can sometimes see the roof line, and if you can kind of get an idea of whether or not that looks a little funky. But if you can't see it, um, then your home inspector usually can go on the roof and kind of give you an idea. No, they can't tell you yes, replace it, or no, you can't. You want to get a roofer for that. So if they go in and they say, hey, this thing got some wonkiness, or it seems like it's pretty old, then your next step would be hire a roofer to take a look and say, okay, and then get quotes, see how much it's going to cost. And these are things you can actually include in your offer, or include in your purchase price. So these can be addressed. These are not things that can't be addressed. Again, you want to check out the AC unit. Usually it's going to be outside of the house. Sometimes it may be on the roof. There may have been an old swamp cooler, which again, something I didn't learn about till I moved here. Swamp coolers are like this. I don't even know how to explain them because I haven't had anybody that actually had one. But they sometimes will abandon them and switch to a central AC unit and leave the swamp cooler on the roof of the unit. And a lot of times, if there's a swamp cooler, it's probably going to be on the roof. So usually you can tell. So you know we're not AC technicians, but again, you can look and see if the AC looks old. If it looks like the sun has been beaten down on it, that's a good indicator that it's probably older. And either you're going to want to make sure that has been serviced recently or that you can get it serviced. The water heater. A lot of times in manufactured homes, the water heaters are going to be in the weirdest places. They may be in a primary room closet. They may be in a bathroom. They may be outside the unit in a hidden door compartment. So make sure you find that water heater and take a look at it. On a water heater, there's sometimes, depending on how old or how new it is, you'll be able to tell the age of it because there's a sticker on there somewhere that has the age on it. It's usually like in the serial number somewhere. So you can see how old it is. If nobody is claiming they know how old it is, you can kind of check and see yourself, or you can look at it. You can eyeball a water heater and say, okay, that looks good, or nah, that looks like it's been there for a long time. And again, it's not an expensive fix, but it's just things that little things start to add up. So the more little things that you know ahead of time going into it, the better it's going to be for you in the long term. So you walk through the house, you've already checked, everything looks great. Well, the one thing you're not going to do, and I'm not going to do it either, we're not going underneath the house. That's what your inspectors are for. And that's why I say never skip on the home inspection on a manufactured home because you are not going to go underneath that property, but they are. So they're going to go underneath that property. They're going to tell you, they can't give you, they're going to tell you if it looks good or not. We'll back up, and I'll tell you why that's important here shortly. And then you're going to have your WDO inspection done. They're going to tell you whether or not they find the presence of termites. And again, there are certain little things you can look for to see if you see them. And usually if the wood looks a little suspect, then there's probably some wood damage that needs to be addressed. If around window sills, you want to look at those. That'll be a tall tale sign. And these are things, again, if you're doing VA or FHA, those may be call outs, meaning you may not be able to go forward unless that stuff gets addressed before your appraisal / your closing And if the seller's not willing to do them, somebody's got to do them in order for you to close. So be careful with negotiating that as something that you're going to do. You want to make sure you're closing first before you say, hey, I'll go ahead and front the money for it, or whatever the case may be. So something else that is very important when you're buying a manufactured home, there is the requirement of another inspection, actually two more. So 9 times out of 10, unless that home is in a park somewhere or in a built up community, that house, that manufactured home is probably going to have a septic tank attached to it. If it does, that septic tank has to be inspected within 6 months of the purchase of the house. Usually that is taken care of by the seller. That can sometimes be negotiated between seller and buyer as far as who's going to cover the cost. And then there's an addendum that we have here that actually addresses how much of the repairs is the seller, if it needs to be repaired, is the seller going to be responsible for it. So if it's an older house, you want to keep these things in mind as you're working on your offer going forward. Typically, you want to ask for like 1% of the purchase price. So, but if you're looking at a home that's only $40,000, what's 1% of 40,000? So again, you got to kind of keep these things in mind as you're putting together your offer, because once you put that stuff on paper, everything's renegotiable. But who wants to do that? You want to do this all up front. So make sure your agent understands that document and all those, how the numbers should look, just in case something happens and we got to address that down the road. So that is the septic tank. Um, and then the other inspection that you will have to do if you're using any loan, I thought this was only for FHA and for VA, but apparently you have to do it for conventional loans as well. You have to get a engineering certification. What that is that is a third party company coming in, going underneath that home and looking at the what they call the tie downs and the stack brick things that they have to hold up the house, and making sure all of these things haven't shifted and that they're still holding this home together as they should properly. Um, I can tell you 100% of the deals I've done so far have had to have some work done underneath this house. I know, I take that back, 99%. I had one that it was fine, there wasn't any issue, but I think the seller just was really good about maintaining that home. So that in itself, I haven't had a job that was less than $2,000 to get resolved. So, and that is something that now, again, if that hasn't been addressed already in the offer process, you now have to negotiate that down the road. And that's when things get dicey and funky, and feelings start getting involved, and people start, well, I'm moving out, so I don't care. And you got a buyer saying, well, I'm moving in, I don't want to deal with this as soon as I move into the house. Or what if, and this has happened, your buyer agrees to pay for that, and then something happens later down the road in the underwriting process, and now they're out that money because they paid for it already, and now they can't get the house, and woo, that's never fun. But that is something that will have to be done and addressed. That is an inspection you cannot get around. I'm sorry, unless you're using cash. That's the only way to get around that inspection. So when you're dealing with that, make sure again that your lenders know that no, you can't skip out on that. And while it makes sense to schedule it as soon as you schedule everything else, because I can tell you the process of getting the report back from that, because here's what'll happen. You'll get the report back. They'll say, hey, this needs to be addressed. You have to get that addressed, and then they have to go back out and re-inspect this. So once they do all that, you're talking probably a week and a half just squaring that away, because it takes a couple days to get those reports back. They are not turned around quickly. They do theirs on their time schedule, and their time schedule has nothing to do with your timeline close. So if you're, I would never, just to be on the safe side of things, I don't think I would ever do a contract for a manufactured home for less than 45 days. And that's because you want to give yourself time just in case everybody takes, all the time they're given by contract to do their portion of the job. And this is something you want to have done before your appraisal. You can have it done after the appraisal, but at that point, uh, your appraisal is probably your last line of defense before a loan approval or denial. letter. And I'm thinking on the buyer side of things. As a buyer, I want all the protections I possibly have going through the process in case something happens and I need to pull out of this deal and save my earnest money deposit or save any more money going down that rabbit hole, because you're paying for all of it. You're paying for the home inspection, you're paying for the WDO inspection, you're paying for the engineering certification, you're paying for the appraisal. These are all things you're paying for, and they are not refundable. So make sure this is what you want to do before you start sinking your money into it. And I'm not saying sinking it as a bad thing. I'm saying as you start putting funds into this deal, make sure this is where you want to go and where you want to be, because you're not getting that money back, and that starts to add up. So those are the inspections you have to make sure are taken care of before you get to the end, where appraiser is gonna excuse me, the underwriter is gonna look through everything and say, okay, we are good to go. We can close on this deal. Now, if you're doing a hard money loan or a chattel loan, and again, I may be saying that wrong. If you're doing either one of those, a lot of this is going to, they don't care. But the down payments tend to be higher on those, so you may need more cash out of pocket up front to get into the home. Usually, I think 5% is probably the minimum that you're going to get if you're using one of those loan types. Whereas VA, of course, is no money down. FHA is 3.5% minimum. Conventional can go down as low as 3%, and I do believe there are loan options that can go down to 1%. And then also keep in mind this: if you're using one of those off-brand off-brand loan types, the chattel loans, the hard money loans, whatever the case may be, those interest rates also tend to be higher. I've seen them as the lowest I think I saw was like 9%. So yeah, we're at like 7 now. So, the grand scheme of things, and usually they tend to be a lower price point, but the interest rates for whatever reason tend to be higher on manufactured homes. That is not the case with VA and FHA and conventional, but it may be for one of those other loan options if you have to go that route. So these are things to keep in mind as you are in the space of looking for a new home for yourself and possibly your family if you have one. Um, I absolutely would love the opportunity to talk to you more about it, answer any questions you have. So if you're in the space of looking for a manufactured home here in Arizona, give me a call, 623-207-7146. Thank you so much for joining me this Saturday morning, and happy house hunting.